Hey there, it is Faith Talk Live. I'm Rick Probst.
And I'm Dan Ratcliffe.
Hey, what a pleasure to talk to this guy, David Helling. He's a writer, director, and there's a movie coming out in theaters on March 31st. It's called His Only Son. David's here to talk about it. David, how are you?
I'm doing all right. It's good to be with y'all.
Glad to have you on. We were talking beforehand, and we found out you're a Texan, and so I always say we have to have at least one Texan on every week, just to keep up the awesomeness. So we appreciate you joining us.
Well, I appreciate y'all having me. So I'm glad to fill that weekly billet. So,
David, we want to talk about His Only Son, which is just in time for Easter, right? This was all put together, and it's a cinematic exploration of the story of Abraham and his faith, and how his faith was tested, and the sacrifice that he made. Before we get into that, how'd you get started writing and directing? Is this something you've always wanted to do as a child, a high schooler? What? How'd you get into this?
well, I mean, yeah, as a kid, you always, as most kids do, love movies, and actually, I spent most of my childhood, I think, playing with action figures, and so kind of making my own little movies in my mind. And I never really pictured that I would be making movies. I guess I had that desire. And in high school, I did video tech. But then after high school, um, well, during, I guess, middle school and a little bit of elementary, I started to have the desire to be in the military. And then 9/11 happened whenever I was in high school, and then once I found out the Marine Corps was the best branch, that was the trajectory that I decided to put myself on, and so joined the Marine Corps after high school. Did that for 5 years, and during that time went to Iraq. And it was whenever I was in Iraq that the Lord got a hold of my heart. He drew me to His Word and opened my eyes to the truth of the gospel, and the word came alive to me, and I wanted to show others that the word is alive, and that the accounts that we read there are real and true accounts, that the Lord was working through all these lives for thousands of years, His redemptive plan that He had set forth from the beginning. And so I wanted I thought, it came to me whenever I was in Iraq. I was like, wait a minute, I can do biblical films and make these movies, and it would go in front of people who were like me beforehand, and never in their word, and it might draw them to the word, and ultimately present them the gospel, and that they might see these representations, hear the gospel, and be saved. And so from that moment on, after leaving Iraq and then finishing up my enlistment, and my wife and I were praying about direction, where to go. I realized, hey, I'm going to have the GI Bill, and I don't have to go to real college. I can go to film school, and so the Lord opened up every door, and just it made it clear the direction to go. So we went up to San Francisco, of all places, and I started my journey as a biblical filmmaker there at the Academy of Art University in downtown San Francisco. So I started teaching myself how to sew costumes, and on the side, because they don't teach those things in film school. Actually, I was getting a director's degree, so there was a lot of things that I had to teach myself in order to be a sort of a one-man band, and that's doing all sorts of visual effects and green screen work, and sewing the costumes and making the miniatures and the props and all that kind of stuff, and started doing all these little rinky-dink short films that my church really seemed to enjoy, and so they gave me an outlet to continue to do these things. Every Christmas they would have a big Christmas production called The Story, and they gave me an outlet to be able to put these biblical shorts into year after year, and so it gave me incentive to actually finish a project rather than just leaving it like 80% and moving on to something else in a PhD fashion. So then, yeah, after doing that for about a decade, then the door opened up to do my first feature, and that's His Only Son. Even though I had written a number of other films before this, this one happened to be at the right price point that it was manageable to do for a first one. And so now, after working on this film for nearly 5.5 years, here we are.
Wow.
It's the total answer to prayer that I mean, because we shot this thing, we were supposed to shoot in the fall or November, December of 2018. We ended up shooting in the summer of 2019, and since then I spent all these years. I mean, because now we're in the spring of almost the spring. Are we spring? I think we might be spring.
Yeah, yeah.
2023. And now all that time has passed, and it's just been allowed me to polish and work on the 325 visual effects shots, get the thing fully edited, and while praying that the Lord would bring this before the masses. And it's like you literally praying, even like right here next to me, praying for years that the Lord would do incredible things with it that would be so, it would be unmistakable that it's his hand alone at work in the whole process. And now to see this Easter theatrical release, which is something I thought would have been, I was like, man, this would be perfect. Even while writing the script, I was like, man, this would be perfect to do an Easter theatrical release. But just because you have that thought, it doesn't mean that it's going to happen. I mean, every filmmaker wants to have their film on the big screen, but it's so rare for it to happen. And now that it's fully coming to pass, not only across the nation, but now we're getting all sorts of international regions that are interested in putting it into theaters in their area as well. So it's just blowing. It's mind blowing, and it leaves you speechless.
Wow. Real quick before we get to more about the movie, I'm curious. You came to know Christ in Iraq of all places. What was there an experience that you had, or just somebody you met there? What happened in Iraq?
Well, so I grew up in a Christian home, and I asked Jesus into my heart, right, whenever I was 8 years old, and so throughout elementary school and high school and all that kind of stuff, I really was. I mean, I'd live morally for moral sake, and I'd make sure you knew about it. It was like I was a pretty good whitewashed tomb.
Yeah.
But it was, whenever I got in the Marine Corps, I didn't go to church for like 3 years. I was like, oh, well, I'd use whatever excuse and like, oh, I'm on base and I don't have a car. And, I could have managed if I was actually wanting to go to church. And, but, we started attending a church, my wife and I, after we had gotten married in Southern California. And they were really good, it was verse by verse exegetical preaching. And I started to get convicted about not being in the Bible myself. And so when it was time for me to deploy, I was like, oh, should I bring my Bible? I was like, oh, I was like, well, I got to pack so much. And this is, my Bible was pretty big that I had, it's actually this one right here. It's a good study Bible, MacArthur study Bible. And so it's, I was like, okay, well, but by God's grace, I ended up taking the Bible with me. And then immediately I just, you spend a lot of time by yourself, because I was with a small one-man team in one of Saddam Hussein's old missile bunkers, primarily. I mean, we spent some time in Ramadi, and then, which is Al Anbar province. And then was it TQ, which was this air base located next to this little town called Habaniya between Ramadi and Fallujah. And so it's located in with a 4-man team there, and working a lot of nights, a lot of time by yourself, a lot of time just to reflect, and just started to grow more and more convicted in my first few weeks there, just to sin in my life and not being in the Word, and so and being there and realizing, man, like, oh, is this where Babylon was? Is this where So was Daniel in the lion's den, like right here? Was this bunker the lion's den at one point? Like you start thinking like, what? And then I was like, oh man. And so I just, dove into the Word, and started reading. And so it was really, just being that whole experience of being there at that right time. The Lord was bringing that all together to change the trajectory of my life.
Wow. Very cool.
Love it. Talking to David Helling, he's writer-director of His Only Son, coming out March 31st, just in time for Easter. HisOnlySonMovie.com is a great place to go to. Real quick, we got a couple of minutes, David, left before we have to take a break. So what can people expect when they see it, and where can they see it?
Well, so you could see it first. I'll start with the second part first. You can see it like you said, March 31st in theaters across the United States. We're going into 1,800 screens. Most of them are already listed currently. You can buy tickets now, like you said, at hisonlysonmovie.com or at angel.com/son. And if you don't see your theater, you can request a theater right there on one of those two sites. And then, but if you do see your theater, we would encourage you to get tickets as soon as possible, because it sends a message to the theaters that you guys want this movie, and they'll keep it there for longer, and they'll open up to more screens. But what can they expect? They can expect. So this is one. It is a humble film, but it's a very heavy film, and you could tell that from the trailer that is focused on getting into the mind of Abraham and what it had to have been like on that 3-day journey as he walked to take Isaac to the place of the offering, and also as he must have been reflecting on all the promises of God that had happened over the decades leading up to him and Sarah having Isaac. And so this really speaks to and encourages all of us that have to spend time in the hard trials of life, waiting on the Lord and understanding that the Lord is still very present. The Lord is still very active in all of our situations. And even through all the struggles and all the sufferings of life, for those of us that love him and are called according to his purpose, he's working that for good. And he's working that he has a plan in the trials of life. And so it's really a meditative movie on that sense, where you can sit and reflect on this real person in history 4,000 years ago, the father of our faith, as they call him, and what he was going through, and what the Lord was writing in his life as an example for us today.
Awesome. His Only Son in theaters March 31st. Go to hisonlysonmovie.com. And as David just said, tell your theater that you and a group of folks are going. And that's just good stuff. David, we'd love to talk to you after the fact to see how everything went, and just see what people are saying about the film. Thank you for your service when you served us and served our country. And thank you for your service now, as what you do is something that's God ordained and just touching so many lives. Again, David Helling with the movie called His Only Son, hisonlysonmovie.com. Let's take a break. We'll be right back. I'm Rick Probst.
And I'm Dan Ratcliffe.
This is Faith Talk.